Hello, friends. Welcome aboard the Round Trip Stories podcast, where we share stories of moving around the world and back again, reflecting on the lessons we've learned along the way. My name is Tracy.
And my name is Melissa, and we are so glad you're joining us for today's episode. We value reflecting on the conversations that we've already had because reflecting helps us remember what we've learned from others' experiences. We want to take a few minutes in this episode to reflect on the TCK interviews that we shared in Season 3. If you haven't heard them yet, we hope that these reflections will inspire you to go back and listen. And if you did already hear them, we hope that we will remind you of something that you gained from what our amazing guests have shared with us. So buckle your seatbelts and make sure your tray tables and seats are in their upright positions as this Season 3 review and Season 4 preview episode gets ready for takeoff.
Happy New Year, everyone. Happy 2025. We're glad for a new year, Melissa. I hope that you had a warm Christmas and holiday season with your family.
Yes, and same to you and same to all of our listeners. Wherever in the world you are, welcome back.
Yeah, and we've been interviewing third culture kids. And just as a reminder, those are kids or adults, anybody who's grown up a large part of their childhood overseas or outside of their passport country. So we are looking back at Season 3, and we are also looking forward to our Season 4, and both have TCKs, our third culture kids, as our guests. And at the end of this episode, we'll introduce our Season 4 guests.
Yeah, and I think that when we first started interviewing TCKs, I don't know that we anticipated that we would spend 2 seasons really interviewing TCKs, but it's been so rich and valuable that we just wanted to keep going.
Right. And it's a different experience as a child coming back to your passport country, whether that's back in high school or college or university. And so it's been great to hear the comments and reflections from all of our new friends.
Yes.
And another thing that we usually call this episode, or we did a year ago, was an aerial view. Because we use the metaphor of a round trip, we have this plane in our heads. And a lot of times we can see the ground below us when we're flying over. And it helps us to get a nice perspective on life. And it's also a time where we're in between and we're thinking about what's behind and what's in front of us. Episodes 34 and 35 were with our guest, who happens to be a third culture kid expert, and her name is Tanya Crossman. She has worked over 20 years with and researching issues related to TCKs to support international organizations, schools, churches, and families. Tanya is originally from Australia and is a TCK herself, having spent her teen years in the United States. She talks a bit about her time as a TCK and transition, and we spent a good chunk of time discussing her research and writings. She's the author of the book Misunderstood, and then a newly published book called Thongs or Flip-Flops, which is specifically for Australian ATCKs or adult third culture kids.
So a quote that we want to share from episode 34, one of the things that Tanya said was that it is so powerful knowing you are not the only one. And I appreciated how she shared about research into what really defines home, these different aspects of what it means for a place to be home. Because when you're moving around the world, home is always on our minds, isn't it? And she shared some really great tips about how to proactively make a place feel like home. And I felt like that was really valuable. So if that strikes a chord with you, go back and listen to episode 34 and 35.
A quote from episode 35 was, "I wouldn't take it back. 95% of TCKs wouldn't take their global childhood back." I really loved that quote because as a parent of kids who I dragged overseas, I am glad that most kids look back and think, I would never take that back. as parents, we get a little nervous. What am I doing to my kid? Or, our parents might even say, what are you doing to my grandkid? So I like the research. Thank you, Tanya. And I also appreciated other parts of her research, which suggested that there are actually timelines of adjustment. And gosh, I like that, and that's another aspect of making us feel normal. I remember she said that for each year that you are away, it takes that many months when you're back to feel a little bit normal again. I also appreciated how she gave other tips, and one of them being how important it is to have the parents to have good mental health because we're supporting our kiddos, or we're supporting our third culture kids.
Our next guest was Shireen Joseph, and she is a writer and storyteller that was born in Chennai, India, but who grew up in the Sultanate of Oman with her mom and her father who worked there. And she moved back to India at the age of 17 for university studies and later moved with her husband to the United States with her kids. And she always felt like an oddball, never quite fitting in anywhere, but now she feels like she can always adapt to whatever culture is around her.
One quote that we really liked from episode 36 was this. Shireen says, "All of my experiences as a child had made me think in a different way, feel a different way, and operate in a different way." And I also appreciated that she described her idyllic and carefree childhood within her Indian diaspora community in Oman. And she just really grew to love Oman and all of the people that she grew up with, both the Indian diaspora and all of the international people that lived in that Middle Eastern country.
Shireen also said in episode 37, "I don't want to lock away my experiences or my childhood because they have made me who I am." And she also reflected on how valuable it is to have immigrant and third culture and expat experiences as Christ followers because it mirrors the connection that our identity as followers of Jesus is meant to be grounded in Christ. And she said that our natural human tendency is to want to control things, but that God has really called us to trust him. And so when we go through these transitional experiences, it gives us opportunities to embrace that struggle and following God through those difficult times. And I really appreciated that.
Then we interviewed Sam Fisher, a third culture kid who grew up in Indonesia as a missionary kid to an American dad and local Indonesian mom. He returned to the U.S. for small stints and then for college, and now a bookseller and dad of 4 in his 40s, and he understands that citizenship in God's family is deeper than our culture.
Sam said in episode 38, in part 1 of his interview, he said that we're part of something bigger than ourselves. And it was interesting to hear him reflecting during his interview on his childhood. And Sam talked about how when he was growing up, his parents, because they were really busy with the work that they were a part of as missionaries, they didn't often get to come to his sporting events or his school, music events, different things that he did, and how different that was for him compared to his kids now, where he is at all of their sporting events and he's videoing the soccer games or whatever so that he can send those to grandparents. And some of the kids' grandparents actually get to come to some of the games, and just how it's making him realize now as he looks back on his childhood, like, that was different for me. I didn't get to have that. And it just reminded me that we reflect differently on our experiences as we grow up and as we go through different experiences with our kids or our parents, that it gives us a different perspective on our life.
Yeah. And in episode 39 of part 2 of Sam's interview, one of the quotes that we appreciated was this: "Every relationship is a cross-cultural experience. You need to meet somewhere in the middle. We thought those were very wise words. Another piece of wisdom that I appreciated from his interview was that he was so thankful and also was strategic in picking a U.S. university where there were other third culture kids. So he was surrounded by others who started from the beginning, as university students do. But some of the hard parts were actually going back for summers back in California where his parents had moved. And that's where he felt a lot of loneliness.
In episodes 40 and 41, we shared our interview with Shakura Babadier, a British citizen of Ugandan descent who grew up almost her whole childhood and teen years in the United States and Singapore in the international schools where her mom taught. As an adult who is now based in London, she has had to sift through her identities and what it meant in each country, and even now as an adult. She has come to realize that her home is her people, wherever in the world they may be.
In episode 40, we enjoyed many quotes, and one of them was this: being Black in some places in the world can be quite challenging. Thank you, Shakura, for sharing all that. She explained that being Black and British in the United States was different than being Black in Singapore, which is different than being a Black woman in the South America, where she did a gap year after high school, which is different than being a TCK Black woman back in the UK. She really does a great job sharing all that, and we appreciated her openness.
In episode 41, Shakura also said, being a third culture kid is absolutely amazing. I wouldn't trade it for the world, but it can also be equally as isolating, and it's okay to have those feelings. She was really honest about some of the challenges that come with the amazing parts of being a TCK. She recommends to listeners that when you're looking for a university, if you're moving back after high school, to find one with a large international student population, because that can be a great way to find people to connect with, other students that will have had some kind of global or international experience. And she says that, if you can make it happen, it's also helpful to be close to your siblings. She was far away from her brother her first year back, but then in the UK, but then she moved closer to him so that they could be together because he was a great support. And she also shared about starting a running group for Black and Brown folks, because she realized that just looking for friends that had the same ethnicity or cultural background was not automatically going to lead to long-term friendships, and that finding people who had similar interests was really kind of the golden ticket to finding relationships and people to connect with on a deeper level.
We had another thoughtful interview, and this time was with Maya Talabard, and she is a French third culture kid who grew up in Korea and China with her family as they were relocated by her father's multinational employer. She valued her experience into international schools and exploring Asia with her family, but transitioning back to a new life in France proved to be another cultural adjustment. She showed an openness that she knows has come from being a TCK, which inspired her to study again in Korea during university.
One quote that Maya shared in episode 43 was, "I'll never get tired of traveling with my family." It was really fun to hear her talking about just the joy that brought her, getting to travel with her family. One thing that I thought was really helpful that she shared was about how when she first moved back to France, one of the things that was a challenge was that she had grown up at schools that had uniforms and never had to think about what she was going to wear to school. But when she moved back to France, now all of a sudden there were clothing choices to make. And that was an an issue she had not expected and had to adjust to. And so it just reminded me that we can feel like we're preparing ourselves for all the hard things, but sometimes the things that come up are things we just never even thought of. But it's okay. We'll get through it. We have to be flexible.
And fashionable.
Yes.
So in episode 44, we loved this quote by Maya. She says, "You have to trust that it will be fine, even if it seems scary." And I love that a young 20-year-old woman is giving that advice to all of us, because it's not just young people who struggle with fear, right? It's all of us.
Right.
And one of the things that I also appreciated about what she said was she was pretty lucky that her transition back to France was made easier because of having family friends nearby her in France who also had similar TCK experiences. And that was through their same company. And so it was great that she can still get together with those friends and they can talk about China. And some of them can even talk about Korea and China. And they're all young women in France.
Such a lucky thing
Yeah.
that she had that. So last in December, we shared our lovely conversation with Justin Lau, who is a Chinese Singaporean who was raised in Japan for all his schooling years, where he attended an international American school. And he eventually went to a British university, but first he had to go back to Singapore for mandatory military service, and that was a massive challenge. So now he's a resident of the UK, and he realizes that he is a cultural mishmash of everything, and he is happy and proud of that.
For episode 45, we loved this quote by Justin. He said, "Your child is going to have their unique experience with their unique set of emotions and thoughts." And that's him talking to us parents of TCKs. And one of the things that I appreciated about Justin in his reflections was that he realized that he really feels at home in a multicultural society like London. He originally went to a university that was quite monocultural, but then realized that the multiculturalism in large metropolitan areas was a better fit for him. And he now really appreciates acting as a bridge between the East and West.
Justin also said in episode 46, this quote is so good. He said, "We need to love each other more. And the only way you're going to love someone is if you get to know someone." And he shared about when he was living in Singapore, when he had to go back there to do his military service, how much he depended on getting to connect, video calls with his friends that he had gone to school with, that now were living in different countries, and how that was such a support during that time of transition. But how wonderful it was when he also found Singaporeans who had a global perspective and an open mind on who he was as somebody who had grown up in Japan and didn't feel like he was Singaporean. And he ended up realizing that he didn't have to just live online and have friendships that, with TCKs, but that there were actually other people too who had not had a TCK childhood, but could be good friends. And, potential friends are all around us. And sometimes we need to just give people a chance.
Love that. We are so thankful for all those guests that we interviewed, and we are really excited to introduce the guests that we have for season 4. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now. And our next episodes, actually after this one, are episodes 48 and 49. And they are our part 1 and part 2 of our interviews with our first guest for this season, Johnny Chin. He's a science teacher from San Francisco and Chinese-American third culture kid who grew up in Beijing, China from the ages of 5 to 18. Johnny tells his stories of discovering his multiple identities as a third culture kid and Chinese American in China and California. He also shares not to be afraid of experiencing grief because that is also part of our experiencing joy.
Our second guest in season 4 is going to be Amy Burton. She is a life and mindset coach who grew up as a third culture kid in Spain. Amy now lives in Alaska, and she's the mother of 3 kids. Amy tells of the difficulties when her parents were beginning a Protestant church in post-Franco Spain. And at the same time, she shares endearing stories of her foundational years there as a TCK. When she had to move back to the U.S., everything kind of fell apart, and you'll get to hear how things got put back together.
I'm so glad they get put back together.
Yes.
Okay, so then our next guest will be Ana Julia Borges. She's a Brazilian third culture kid who spent 7 years of her childhood in Uruguay. Ana Julia is a foodie, sociologist, and curriculum developer for TCK training. When Ana was 8 years old, her parents went to Uruguay to begin university groups for the International Fellowship of Evangelical Students. She encourages TCKs to make their own normal and not to fit into a box.
Our fourth TCK guest of season 4 is Major Ben Scott, a U.S. Army Signal Corps officer who grew up as a third culture kid in Kenya and Germany before returning to the United States for high school. As a missionary kid, he says that he always has a story in his pocket, and it was really fun to listen to his stories, and we can't wait to share them.
Our last 2 guests will be with TCKs who also have their own podcasts. First of that will feature Amanda Bates, an employer branding specialist, storyteller, and transitions consultant. Amanda is also the creative director of The Black Expat, which features content about Black identity and international living, and also includes the podcast Global Chatter. Amanda also happens to be an American TCK who spent many of her growing up years in Cameroon.
Our last third culture kid guest is writer and podcaster Marie Suazo. Marie is originally from the Philippines, and she was raised in Seoul, South Korea, and then Cairo, Egypt, in a diplomat's family. She is the author of the book Tales of a Diplomat's Daughter, and she is the host of the podcast Talks with a TCK Friend.
So, if you're not excited now, then you should be, because we have an amazing lineup of guests.
We're excited.
We're excited. And as we look back, I'm like, wow, we got to interview all these amazing people. And really, it truly is a pleasure for Melissa and I to interview and to share the stories. And we know that you'll enjoy season 4 as well.
So make sure that you tell your TCK friends or the parents of TCKs or just people who like listening to great stories about our podcast so that they can join us. You can sign up on our website at roundtripstories.com to get emails so that you don't miss any of these episodes when they're coming up. And you can also follow us on social media at Round Trip Stories Podcast on both Facebook and Instagram, where we always post when we've got a new episode out in case you need a reminder. And of course, subscribe in your favorite podcast app so that you always will see when we've got an episode coming up. And yeah, we will see you in your podcast app and in your email in 2025. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for listening.
Feliz Año Nuevo, 新年快乐, and Happy New Year.
Yes. Bye, everybody.
Bye.